This week on the podcast, retirement for couples. It's a team sport, and it really is. So let's get into it this week with Phil here on Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts. Welcome into Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts with CPA and personal financial specialist Phil Putney. Now let's get rolling with today's show. Hey gang, welcome into the podcast. Thanks for hanging out with Phil and I as we talk investing, finance, retirement. And Phil, it's a retirement team sport. If you are married, right? If you got that significant other, right? It's a team effort.
Or it should be. Let's put it that way. So.
Fair, very fair. So let's talk a little bit about that this week here on the show. You help a lot of people retire, and there's always dynamics in any relationship where one person's better at something than somebody else. That's what makes the team work, right? Somebody does this better than that, and so on and so forth. And for whatever reason, finances tends to be the same way. Although, funny enough, it seems like when we're coming up as a couple, sometimes it seems like the female tends to kind of lead the charge from a financial standpoint because they're balancing the home budget, getting the school clothes for the kids and shopping and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to retirement, it seems like it goes the other way. Not always, it just kind of seems to be that way. But let's talk about why it's important that both people, especially for retirement, are on the same page. And I know that's something you take very personal when people come in to see you. You're like, hey, I want to make sure that both people know where they stand.
Right. And it's very common to your point that there's one of the individuals, one of the out of the couple that is more heavily involved in the day-to-day finances and probably has a better picture. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's not both parties in the marriage don't have to be looking at the, balancing the budget, so to speak, or all the numbers every day. But, the one that is very involved needs to at least have the other one updated on a regular basis. And especially when it comes to planning in the beginning, because oftentimes, there's different perspectives of what retirement is.
Exactly. That's the first one, right? What is your goal for each other, right? Because if one person's driving the car and the other one's just along for the ride, are they getting a fair say? Are they happy or comfortable with what's being done?
Right. Yeah. And this is always the interesting part to me as we start that discussion of, tell me what retirement looks like to you, is hearing the response between both couples. And it very often, the husband will say something and the wife is like, what are you talking about? You never had, golf. You never told me you ever had any, interest in golf. And that's one of his goals in retirement is to take up golf as a hobby or something, or whatever it happens to be. But that's the important part to understand is that retirement isn't just about maybe, especially if there's only one of the two that is working, bringing in the majority of the household revenue, so to speak, and savings. It's not just about them. They're the ones that is maybe quote unquote retiring, but you're a couple and that's the way hopefully you've lived your life so far. So how does that look as a couple now going into retirement? What are each of your goals in retirement? What do you want to do? Because it's no longer individual schedules, and to some extent it is. You still will have your own independent activities, but there's a lot more together time.
It needs to be. It needs to be.
Right. And what does that look like?
Yeah.
So it's always interesting and important to get both parties to kind of put down, well, what are their goals? What does retirement look like to them? So we know from a financial standpoint how this plays out, but also just to have that discussion early on. So,
all right. So let's ask. So right off the bat, do you find that most couples have already talked about these things when they sit down with a financial professional for the first time? More times than not, have they done it or have they avoided it?
Yeah, most of the time not. There are a few that have already kind of thought that through, but no, it's to the point of, the example I was giving it. And that happens more often than not where a surprise, and not a bad surprise, but just kind of a surprise comes up in the meeting of, I never knew you had that interest, and which is kind of cool because now you're starting to get different perspective of each other. And that's a different phase of life now. What does that retirement look like? But you want that up front. You don't want to have this big surprise later on of, you
Well, it
know,
can be dawn. I mean, if it's something
especially,
mild, that's one thing. But if it's something heavy and you guys aren't
right.
talking, that's certainly not good. You've got to get on the same page. And obviously, money, talking about money is very difficult. I mean, it's the number one reason for divorce, right? So it can be a very
Right.
taboo situation to stay away from. And I think a lot of times advisors bring an almost, we've talked about it before, an almost mediator, counselor, guidance counselor kind of thing to that.
Yeah, my role is being just that, a guidance to both parties, and helping, I don't want to say mediate, but bring that together into one plan, because at the end of the day it is one plan. And one of the sometimes the bigger topic that comes up during this discussion is, well, where do you want to live in retirement? And maybe, let's say, the husband, not to be sexist, is the one that's maybe had the career and bringing in the revenue, and their dream has always been, well, you know what, I'm out of here. I'm heading south. I want, I'm done with the cold weather. And the wife is like, well, wait a minute, but all our grandkids are here. I'm not leaving our home that we've had and raised our kids in. And they haven't had that discussion early on. Well, that's a big discussion to have. Can you afford two houses? Is that an option? Or if not, well, how does this work?
Yeah, and you're getting ahead of me because I was going to
Yeah,
ask you what's the big topics that people should be discussing maybe prior to sitting down with an advisor. Obviously, where you want to live could be one. What's some other ones?
yeah. So where you want to live, I mean, that is key, because that plays into a lot of things. Second is going to be, what are your hobbies? What do you want to do in retirement? We talked in previous videos about you having something to retire to, right? You can't retire just from something to nothing. What's that going to be? What are you going to fill your time with? And it doesn't have to be, joint hobbies. Maybe there are. Maybe you both have a passion together. That's great. But what are your independent passions too? And let's make sure we build those in so that retirement's enjoyable for both parties. So,
All right, so let's talk about a big difference that people would have and how you have to solve them, and that is risk tolerance differences. So two people come in, they're probably not aligned from a risk standpoint. Maybe they are, it doesn't happen often. And also spending habits, right?
right.
So you've got two different people, one's more comfortable with risk, one's averse to it, and then maybe one spends more and the other doesn't, right? So that creates a real problem for the plan design too.
I mean, it does. The spending, the goal there is doing the planning up front, running that math so that we at least have a guideline. And I, hate to use the term budget, and because we never want to put somebody on a budget, but at least we have a guideline to know, well, this is the spending range, let's say, that we can be within.
But if a budget's needed,
just so that
I mean,
they
it's
have
needed,
a guideline
right? I
to
mean,
understand. Right. But and that's, yeah. So I mean, if we get into that in the review process, then it's like, hey, we planned on you spending, 6,000-8,000 a month, whatever it is, but you're spending 10 on a regular basis. There's a big problem, right? This is not going to work. Maybe it will. Maybe if the 6 or 8, there was a significant surplus left in the end, we know that, okay, that's going to work. And that's, again, one of the answers that are questions that we answer in that planning process is, well, here's our desired spending. If there is significant assets projected to be left at the end, we run the other scenario to say, well, what does it look like of spending everything? And our version of spending everything is whatever our life expectancy projection is, we're going to add 5 years to that, and then come up with a number that at our projected life expectancy, we've got a pool of money left to get you at least another 5 years. So then we can give a maximum spending level. So maybe their spending is planned at 8, based on the math, they're going to leave a lot at the end. They really could spend 10 or 12, right? So that's I call it the guardrail. So it gives them at least a little bit of leeway to say, hey, we're planning on this, whatever that number is, 8,000. We could technically spend at 12,000 a month. I wouldn't recommend it, because now you're bumping against the guardrail through retirement, but at least you have that guideline. So, but then risk, I mean, that's the other side of the equation too. And balancing it between spouses, often you'll have one maybe more aggressive, the other one more conservative. And it's really, I think, more on education especially like the more aggressive one, realizing that, hey, you're in retirement now. This is all you have left, and we've got limited time and we're spending from it. So we need to position that risk differently and maybe pare it back a little bit. The one that's more conservative, the education is, the reality is this money, again, is all you have. We have to make it last. And if we make it too conservative, inflation's going to eat away at it. So we have to have some growth. So to me there, it's just a balance of listening to both parties, but then bringing them together from a risk standpoint.
Very true. And, I kind of, it brings that back to the prior or to the initial question really is, if one person handles everything, how important is it for both of them truly to be involved? And again, I think you take that very seriously in saying, look, maybe you don't have an interest in knowing everything about the plan, but you need to understand the basics here and have a good working view. And that's something that you take serious.
Yeah, absolutely. And, if there is one that's more involved, the other one doesn't really care, let's say, they just want to make sure they've got enough to spend whatever it is that they're targeting to spend. Maybe they're the one paying the bills. To your point, they see the money coming in each month from a paycheck and have been paying the bills. That's all they care about. They just want to know that, hey, I'm going to have this amount coming in each month. And the other party is more handling the overall finances, the investment side of it, and the risk. I mean, that's fine. Again, it's education, making sure they're both on the same page. So it's a matter of understanding the role, who does what, but then making sure that at some point they are coming together and they both have some input into the plan and oversight.
Right. And knowing what to do when one of them passes, because look, that's the point, right? One of us is going to die.
Well, right.
And more than likely it's going to be the male first, right? I mean, it's just statistical average. Doesn't always happen. But so if you're not involved in your own retirement journey, what kind of hurdles do you think you're going to hit when you've lost your significant other and the person who was handling that stuff? So you got to have at least some working knowledge.
Right. And that's where having an advisor really helps. Even if there is one party that is maybe more involved in the process, keeping that connection with the spouse that's not is important. They don't have to be involved day to day, but, maybe once a year on the review, bring them in just to let them know kind of where things are at. But if something does happen, to your point, maybe that's the male that's more involved. If something happens to them, well, at least now the surviving spouse has somebody to go to, right? And that's important because you're not getting all of a sudden all the finances put on your plate, so to speak, at the time that's not ideal, right? You're running through a lot of emotional, things to deal with at that point with the loss of a spouse. You don't need to be dealing with the whole financial aspect of it at that point. So having that third party, an advisor to help walk through that process so that at the very beginning, you don't need to worry about it. And in fact, I'm working through this very scenario with a client now. The husband was the one that I talked to all the time. We had met with the wife occasionally, and, she was somewhat involved. He passed away pretty unexpectedly, so now all of a sudden she's left kind of sorting through things from a household finance standpoint. And I'm able to help her from the investment standpoint to say, well, this is what we had set up and, you're okay. Here's the money coming in on a regular basis. So,
right. Well, that's the point right there. Right. And no matter who's handling it, we're, none of us get out of here alive. So you want to make sure you got a plan and a strategy for dealing with that. And that's why it's a team sport. So we'll kind of pull a Jerry Springer here real fast, Phil, and just say any final thought when it comes to, working as a team for this?
No, it's just in the beginning, be involved, both parties. I encourage it. In fact, I won't meet with just especially in the beginning, with just one of the parties. I want to see both, husband and wife together, just so we can get each party's opinions, their goals for retirement, things like that. Beyond that meeting, if, once we get into some of the numbers and the detail, if there's one party that's not that interested in that, their eyes are going to glaze over and it's not something they really care about, that's fine. They don't have to be involved in that, but at least in the very beginning process of setting what the target is and the goal and hearing kind of their side of the story, so to speak, is key.
Okay. And the sooner the better. If you're a younger couple, no matter the situation, if you're 35, 40, 40, make sure you're starting to have these conversations and make sure you're starting to do some planning because it'll be here faster than you know it. So retirement, who knew? It's a team sport. So make sure you're reaching out and getting a quality conversation in with financial professionals that do this day in and day out. If you need some help, reach out to Phil at 248-888-7530. Numbers on the screen. You can also check the show notes here on YouTube or any of the podcasting apps for details in the show notes, links to reach out to him, so on and so forth. And don't forget to subscribe to us on whatever podcasting app you like, Apple, Spotify, or of course YouTube. Hit the thumbs up and ring the notification bell. And we'll see you next time here on Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts with Phil Putney, who is always here to help. So we'll see you next time right here on the show.
The Tax Smart Retiree is your comprehensive guide to mastering tax efficiency for a flourishing retirement. You will find indispensable advice and actionable strategies designed to enhance tax savings, maximize Social Security benefits, protect against market volatility, and develop a customized retirement plan. To get your free ebook, click the link in the show notes of today's episode and download your copy of The Tax Smart Retiree right now.
Investment advisory services offered through AFS Wealth Management. The content of this program is provided for informational purposes only and is not a solicitation or recommendation of any investment strategy. Investments and/or investment strategies involve risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will achieve its objectives.